veo ahora.
Gracias. Un minuto más y vamos a empezar. Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Buenos días. Gusto verlos a todos los que les permita su contexto, tener la cámara abierta para sentirnos más en comunidad. Se los agradecemos. Los que no, también entendemos. Micrófonos cerrados y la misma dinámica que el día de ayer. Es un gusto verlos y que estén aquí con nosotros beneficiándose de la conexión con el profesor Anas. Va a ser un workshop de verdad muy productivo y queremos aprovechar cada minuto. Así que de hecho ya siendo las 10:03, we're going to begin, Anas. I'm going to introduce you in Spanish and then I'll signal that the floor is yours. Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Gracias nuevamente por acompañarnos. El día de hoy tenemos el segundo workshop en vivo sobre transformación curricular para la enseñanza y el aprendizaje activo e híbrido. El día de ayer tuvimos un día muy provechoso con la profesora Michelle Tomasic de MIT, la cual nos pudo compartir su experiencia en esta transición de enseñanza en persona a virtual a híbrido dentro de la Facultad de Física de MIT. Nos pareció muy enriquecedora su experiencia. Esperamos que a ustedes también les haya sido muy útil. Y ahora tenemos el lujo de tener al profesor Chalah de Harvard, el cual nos va a compartir su experiencia como uno de ahora sí que los autores de la estrategia para la transición también de enseñanza en persona a virtual a híbrido de la Facultad SEAS de Harvard. Y él no nada más es alguien que ha hecho esa transición, sino que también informa la innovación en enseñanza y aprendizaje en la universidad en general, y bueno, que lo ha hecho alrededor del mundo. Voy a leer brevemente una biografía, la cual realmente no encapsula todo lo que ha hecho el profesor Chalah, pero para que sepan con quién estamos trabajando el día de hoy y bueno, así nos dé contexto. El profesor Chalah es director de los laboratorios de enseñanza y aprendizaje de pregrado de la Escuela de Ingeniería y Ciencias Aplicadas y profesor de Ciencias de la Ingeniería en la Facultad de Ingeniería John A. Paulson de la Universidad Harvard. Dirige el equipo de personal docente de apoyo y trabaja con el profesorado para crear un entorno propicio para la educación práctica en ingeniería. Chalah también desarrolla nuevos laboratorios utilizando los mejores métodos pedagógicos, ayuda con la planificación estratégica y apoya la creciente presencia de SEAS, que es la Escuela de Ingeniería y Ciencias Aplicadas, en bioingeniería. Chalah recibió su doctorado en química de la Universidad de Massachusetts Amherst, su investigación postdoctoral en la Escuela de Medicina de Harvard y el Centro Médico Beth Israel Deaconess Center, el cual se centró en comprender el mecanismo de conmutación entre la vía de supervivencia celular y la vía de muerte programada. Chalah también se ha desempeñado como director senior del laboratorio del Departamento de Química de Pregrado en UMass Amherst, donde dirigió 6 laboratorios y supervisó a varios asistentes de enseñanza y estudiantes de pregrado. También trabajó como gerente en OMO, Unilever International. La verdad que su experiencia de nuevo no se encapsula aquí. Él es uno de los profesores más innovadores en enseñanza y aprendizaje a nivel mundial. Espero que aprovechen cada minuto. Tenemos de las 10 a las 12, tendremos un break. Él nos va a dirigir y bueno, seguiremos lo que él nos indique en cuanto al paso, las preguntas y el break. Bienvenido. Welcome, Anas. We're so excited to have you from all over Latin America, the Caribbean, Spain, and Portugal. The floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. It's truly a pleasure to be here today and join this LASPAO event. I have been a proud LASPAO member, I would say, part of the family, working with a lot of colleagues on informing the discussion related to global development of teaching and learning. And I feel that there's a lot to do and to learn about, especially in this day and age where we went through a very transformational experience that led us to where we are today. So as you may have heard, my background is in chemical engineering and bioengineering, but I have been in education for the past 15 years. And at Harvard, we keep trying to re-innovate ourselves and how we function. And we have been doing that at a specific pace, but then the pandemic hit and we were faced with different challenges. So today, I want to share with you some of the take-home messages that we have actually gained. And I want to reflect on what that means outside of our boundaries into areas where colleagues like you might benefit from some of the learning that happened at Harvard. So with that said, I will start sharing my slides. Let's put this up. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, perfect. So this is my name, Anas Chalah. I'm the Assistant Dean for Teaching and Learning at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. This is my email address if you have any questions later on. But I want to start with a question. Why do we pivot? So the definition of the word pivot is to modify a policy, an opinion, a product, while retaining some continuity with its previous version. So pivot means you're changing a direction, but you're still driving. Pivot means you're changing the way you are operating, but you're still operating. So why do we pivot in general? It's a very general question, and it doesn't have much to do with education yet. So why do we pivot? There are many reasons why we do that. And there is a very nice article that came out in October 27th, just recently, 2021, that says saying goodbye to Facebook, why companies change their name. It's really related to pivoting. And if you read the article, it gives different reasons to why we change directions. One of which is a social pressure. For instance, there was an offensive logo at the sport team that they had to change because it was offensive. Another reason could be that there is a reason, an event that took place that made the company unpopular, and they had to change that by changing and rebranding. Another reason could be that the company is trying to say, we are doing more products, we are changing in our portfolio. It could be that the logo or the entire vision of the company changed from the time it started to the current date. It could be that there are some copyright problems, of course. But then the most important part for us today is course correction. When there is a specific direction we are headed into, and then we realize that that is not going to get us to the final destination, or that the final destination has changed. So that's very important as an entry point for what I want to discuss here. So what do you think took place during the pandemic? It's one thing to say that we had to stay home and stay safe, and we developed a vaccine. That's good and fine. One might look at the financial implications of what happened. One might look at what happens at the society level. But then for us, we can look at the broader picture of what happens to professionals like you and I who had to still manage or work, but they had to really reflect on this new environment, the new ecosystem around us. So this is a nice article from the Harvard Business School, published recently, about the fact that most professionals excelled while working from home. Okay, and the article goes to realize that that excelling that I'm describing happened, that many professionals kept their jobs while working at home. 1 in 3 felt both their overall performance and quality of work was better than the year before. That's very important to remember. 1 in 3 were actually able to better focus on work from home. Same thing happened to career development. 35% of the people that got interviewed rate more for professional growth, right? Men more than women. That's an alarming point, but it's important to highlight. 29% continued their education. 34% took online courses. Those are professionals, okay? And finally, the community feeling to what happened during the pandemic suffered, of course, but people reflected on the fact we use different modes of communication to deal with our coworkers. That's very important to remember. So it actually forced us to think innovatively about how we communicate. Okay, so far, none of that is truly about education. This is all about understanding where we stand. Okay, so how about in education? What took place for us educators? For us to answer this question, we have to reflect on where we started. So how did we teach in the past? Well, I would argue teaching did not start when we were born. Teaching started when humans found themselves on Earth, and they were able to transfer knowledge between different generations, and in this case, by drawing things on cave walls. That is a form of education. That's a form of saying, here's my experience. I'm going to share it with Anna. I'm going to share it with Fabio. I'm going to share it with everybody else. This is a form of education. It's very elementary, but very effective. Talking about effective, here's another form of education. And this was a story that was very popular back in 2019 of a teacher who actually wore this bodysuit to talk about anatomy, human anatomy, and how we can actually look at her body and learn from where the location of these organs is and how they connect to each other. That's another form of education that is very innovative. So the way we teach requires this kind of interaction with material, interaction with subjects, and with humans. So if you look at that and look at what we did effectively all the way to the point before the pandemic, we had two general modes of education, one of which that is in person, where you have the teacher communicating with the students, and that physical communication takes place in classrooms. So you can see your students and they can see you as an educator. I would argue this mode of teaching to the greatest degree was about a receiver and transmitter mode. So I am transmitting the knowledge, students are receiving the knowledge. And in doing so, it somehow dilutes the effect of building a community into having those receivers and one transmitter, or maybe multiple transmitters. That was in general how we taught in person. At the same time, we realized we can teach online, and we did that effectively for many years. And that required that instruction by the same teacher done online through communicating with maybe the same body of students, but all of that happened digitally. So you're actually talking to students via Zoom, and the course has a Canvas page, and everybody is communicating through that mode of interaction. And then later on, we realized that synchronous approach of teaching could be supported by the asynchronous approach of teaching, where you have the ability to take elements of what you are teaching, to put it online beforehand. Students can review that, and clearly that asynchronous approach turned into a flipped classroom exercise in which we can say to our students, learn about the topic and then come to the classroom with questions. So I could dig deeper with you, my students, into the subject matter. This was basically the development to get to the online approach, and that basically was an effective mode of teaching. And then the pandemic hit, right? So 2020 is a very important date for us. And if you think about it, we have 1.5 billion learners in 165 countries that got affected by that. That's not a light number. And if you think deeper about that, we could actually learn from that quote from the general director in the UNESCO for education, that says, never before have we witnessed educational disruption on such a scale. It's a massive scale. So when we talk about pivoting, remember what I started my talk with, pivoting, this is a reason to pivot, okay? The difference here is the reason for pivoting was urgent, was sudden, and there is a lot riding on that in terms of, do we have the resources to pivot? Do we have the skill sets to pivot? I would reflect on my own experience with the teams I lead here at SEAS at Harvard that it was a sudden pivot. We had a spring break. We were about to send our students for spring break, and then all of a sudden we told them, don't come back. That's it. The semester, the way you know it, has ended. You go home, and then we are communicating with you remotely. That pivot is sudden and urgent, and we didn't have the skill sets to manage it. So this is very important to focus on. But from that point on, we learned a lot, right? So now we know that during the pandemic, our mode of operation is mainly online. We have to still leverage the asynchronous and the synchronous approach, but the way we did that in the past was optional. Now it is mandatory. That's the only way we can run during the pandemic. And because of that, many colleagues of us started talking about what that means and learning from that experience and publishing some of the results. So you can see tremendous amount of work that took place related to active learning in a hybrid and physical distant classrooms, related to new pedagogy that's emerging. Online learning is key and contributing factor. Are we okay? Okay. Things related to active learning coexisting with physical distance classrooms, topics related to physically distanced classrooms and how you manage that. So many different studies were performed as we were trying to figure out our way. Talking about pivoting. We are still educating, but now the way we educate is changing. So I have a quick individual reflection here for all of you I want to start with, which is, if I am to ask you this question of what's the biggest challenge you faced when you went 100% remote, whether you're an educator, a manager, a leader in your institute, we are all in the same field of education. That's why we are here. So you are connected to education. So if I ask you for this individual reflection to take maybe 5 minutes and think about the biggest challenge you faced when you went 100% remote, what would that be? One challenge. I don't want you to list more than one. And can we please use the chat box to add that challenge? Just type it, keep it short, please, so people can read about it. And I'm going to have my colleagues here help me maybe gather some information and input from your answers. So this is an invitation to all of you to please think, and then type your comment about this question. And we're going to take 5 minutes. So it's 10:20 my time right now. In 5 minutes, 10:25, I hope to reconvene and hear your thoughts. Okay.
Super. I'll just tell them in Spanish, Ana. Por favor, si pueden poner en el chat la respuesta a esta reflexión que les invita a hacer el profesor Anas, que es cuál es el reto más grande que enfrentaron cuando se fueron a 100% remoto. No sé si alguien tenga su micrófono abierto, si lo puede cerrar. Muchas gracias. Entonces, si quieren poner en el chat, lo pueden poner en inglés o en español. Okay. Muchas gracias. And as we're getting excellent responses, I'm in awe by all the challenges, and I think you will be able to relate as well. You let us know, and we'll
Great.
translate for you.
Yeah, let's give it one more minute, and then if you can quickly translate that to me. I'm trying to open the chat box. My apology, it actually disappeared on me.
I don't know if he has it available, Fabio, because he's using his Harvard credentials. Can he see it?
He should be able to, because he's a presenter. But if it's not showing, Professor, take a look right on the side of your microphone. You're gonna be seeing that you have a video, and then you should have a five additional buttons. One is for participants, for conversations and reactions. Can you see those?
I only see the emojis, and then I see participants. I see 3 dots, and then I see exit spotlight.
It's probably something related to your Harvard account then. But
No
we're going to be sending to you.
Perfect. Okay, so it's 10:25 now, and I would love to hear maybe common themes that if you can share that with me.
I think the assessment is a big topic for everybody, the difficulty of assessing hybrid education. Also the connection with students. It's a big topic, how to find a way to reconnect.
Yeah.
And also we have technology and internet, as well as the actual having a computer, having access to a computer.
Excellent. That's truly what we also face at Harvard. So I think we all should feel comfortable that that is not any different than what we had to go through. So I'm hearing from Anna that there are comments related to assessment, challenges related to communicating with our students, and challenges related to technology. So now I'm going to show you what we found out and how we created a roadmap around. Because again, when we pivot, the goal here is to showcase how we learned from the pandemic, and that influenced our current teaching now that we are doing things in person. And that's where the word hybrid teaching comes handy. Hybrid, as you know, is delivering the instructions and the learning and teaching activities, both face-to-face and online. That combination is what makes it hybrid. And that is something I know that you are all familiar with. But then the devil is in the details. How might we actually think about the approach that we were forced to do, and then how we evolve beyond that type of urgency? So if you think about our approach, we started in the spring break 2020. That was a quick pivot. We had to do something. We sent students home. We said, don't come back. We had a summer during 2020 when everything was remote, including us on campus. We were not able to actually take any of that research that you see here and do any sense of it yet because it was too early. But during summer, we had the ability to regroup, recharge, and strategize. Then we started planning for the entire year ahead of us. That's fall 2021 and spring 2021, because we were forced to actually think creatively about the next year. And we thought about how we can be ready. We can be ready. Remember the challenges? Some of those challenges are human related. We as the teaching staff has to be ready. And then we thought about how we can really do remote education, bringing the technology on board and the knowledge on board, and really thinking about our curriculum. That was an amazing opportunity for us to rethink our curriculum. And of course, assessment, as you see, is really on our list of the things we had to think about. So here are the challenges that we had to immediately deal with. Okay, these are COVID-induced challenges. Quick pivot, remember. Student challenges, number one is access. Similar to what you said, access to synchronous classes, access to technology, hardware and software, different time zones, because we sent our students back home, but back home could be in China, could be in Africa, somewhere in Africa, could be in the Middle East. It doesn't mean that our students are in the same time zone. Even in the US, we have different time zones. Family arrangements, students having to go back to their fathers and mothers' houses with maybe kids around and other things that are happening around them. That could be a total distraction. That was part of the student challenges that we had to deal with. Faculty challenges. The most important part here is the desire to replicate online what we normally do in the classroom. That replication assumes that everything is transferable, and that's not the case. Soon got discovered that that's unpractical strategy. So we had to think innovatively about new ways of doing hybrid education. It's not just putting things online and combining that with in-person activities. It's not the case. That's a brand new way of teaching right now. Challenges related to technology and new pedagogy, which we will talk about later. And finally, the lack of time and resources to imagine and implement change. Faculty are busy people. They are also running research labs and other activities. Do they have the time to attend to that type of pivot? Challenges related to the system are a bit different. Here we have the offering of active learning online. How would you do that? How would you teach actively online? How would you bring the new pedagogy and think about it while you are still teaching? We had summertime, but that's only 3 months. Then we had an entire year that we had to innovate, but we were still teaching. It's in the middle of teaching that we have to be innovative. That was a challenge. Recording short videos while staff and teaching staff worked remotely. How would you do that? You're outside of your lab or your school. Designing and assembling kits that were sent out, active learning kits done by my staff members that were sent to students all over the world, and I will reflect on that later. And finally, offering students remote access to software that is solid and could be helpful to them to maintain their connectivity to our software resources. So these are some of the challenges that we identified here at the School of Engineering and at Harvard in general. But this is more important to focus on. The new pedagogical opportunity was truly what kept us busy, because we had the opportunity to think about our curriculum. We had a full year where we can truly challenge the common knowledge and themes about how we teach our students. We had the opportunity to pivot again, but this time it's a long-term pivot. It's not a sudden pivot. We are able to create transformational curriculum, and I will share with you some of that. That was something that we were really happy about because it informed the way we thought about hybrid education. For instance, we thought more about wider learning experiences. What does that mean? It means we could bring multiple faculty to teach one course, but they could bring different knowledge and different way of thinking of the complex issues that we are trying to teach, because things are happening remotely, and that's way more doable than before. Thought about different inspiring contents that was really transformed because of the COVID, and I'll show you some examples later as well. The global experience was another very important things we captured. Think about the following. Our students are all over the world right now. Why not leverage their environment to teach them? Rather than having all of them in one location, surrounded by the same environment, think about the depth and the treasure hidden in the fact students are all of a sudden taking the same course, but they are all over the world. They could leverage their current environments if we planned that to be part of the course pedagogy. That was the challenge. We had to think about that and turn the fact they are remote into a blessing. Turn the fact that the students are remote into a plus for us. So that was related to the global experience. The personal experience. How might we think more about the student, because now they are in different isolated environments and we could miss the point or the signal related to how advanced they are in their studies. Because I don't see my students face to face anymore. They don't have this accessibility to me anymore. So I have to really work harder on this personalized teaching and attend to every student by extra energy and extra attention to their teaching progress. That was something we had to think about, but that was also an opportunity to restructure our offering. And finally, constraints related to space, distance, and physical resources, that which I will talk about next. By the way, if there are any questions, please raise your hand, stop me, and Anna will be kind to share with me that there's a question. Okay, so now we are post-pandemic. What have we learned? Truly, what have we learned from this 1 year or 1.5 years of remote education? We learned that there are major challenges related to how we teach. Again, one might jump into saying, well, we are doing hybrid education. That's not all what we learned. There's so much deeper discussion that should take place when we talk about what have we learned. For instance, when we talk about instruction, synchronous versus asynchronous, the ways we can really leverage student communities for them to learn from each other, that is where a lot of work took place. And that was essential for us, because you have to leverage students and peer-to-peer instruction in any kind of successful teaching that is influenced by what we've learned from the pandemic. So if you think more about that, you realize that if you are to do active learning, going back to the fact that we have to really think about instruction that could be done before you walk into the classroom and instruction that happens during the classroom. During the pandemic, for active learning purposes, we had to think about packaging active learning resources and sending it to students for them to be able to learn actively but remotely. That was not an easy challenge. And we were able to truly take most of the courses that we teach, and that is in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, computer science, applied math, applied physics, bioengineering, and chemical engineering. We were able to take these courses and think creatively about what could be packaged, designed differently, packaged, and sent to students for them to still be educated remotely but actively. And this data here is just to show you some statistics. So in fall 2020, I'm focusing on 4 major engineering disciplines that we teach. We were able to offer kits in 66% of this discipline, 0% of this discipline, because this was really related to wet labs, 80% in this engineering discipline, and 83% in this engineering discipline. Same thing happened the semester after, that's spring 2021. So we did not hit the 100% complete coverage of everything that we used to do on the ground, done remotely. We were not able to reach the 100%, but almost 80%, between 60 to 80% of the courses that we were able to support actively with active learning on the ground were able to be supported remotely. And that required transforming the way we think about education, transforming the way we think about offering resources remotely. And that is very important to highlight, because when we came back on campus this semester, a lot of the faculty that realized we were able to support their courses remotely with active learning, that's active learning lab kits, ALL kits, a lot of those faculty came back to us and said, can we still offer kits when we teach physically back on campus? Let that sink in. The majority of the faculty that enjoyed remote active learning when we went back on campus asked that we keep elements of what we did remotely now that we are on campus. That is the true meaning of hybrid education. We don't have to send things to students in different countries, but now we can send to students things to students in their dorm room, where they live, here around us, still educate them actively before they get into the active learning labs or before they get into the classrooms. So elements of what we did online that we were forced to do online still reside, still are in-person effects right now. So when we talk about remote teaching, there are a few things I wanted to highlight. Oops, sorry. Few things I wanted to highlight. The first thing is, how might we think about engagement and accountability? Very important things to highlight. So for instance, when it comes to better interactions during online lectures, there were ways of increasing engagement and way of increasing accountability. I'm going to take that as an example. Some of us said some of the challenges we faced was really to keep students engaged when I teach online, including, for instance, ways including having pop-up questions, surveys that you can include in your lecturing, and that allows students to pause, read the question, and provide feedback, and then allows us the ability to offer feedback. Ways to provide accountability for engagement, it could be basically to assign a grade for student engagement. A lot of us did that already, but that is basically one of the take-home messages. How would we induce student ownership of the learning style and pacing? Because you're doing things online right now, and some of the work that we are offering them is asynchronous. They could do it at any point they want. But that is the plus, because that allows them the ability to think about how many times they want to watch the same lecture. Can they pause it? Can they rewind? Can they search more? Take notes, stop, come back. All of that was helpful for students as they engage with the online teaching, especially the asynchronous type of online teaching. How would you keep everybody accountable for that? Again, you can assign a grade for that type of online search. Third point, how might we create strong ties between the asynchronous material and the online class meetings? Again, this is a hybrid approach. We have to meet with students online. In this case, hybrid online, you're meeting with them online, but there's also the asynchronous part that could be done by the student at any given point. How can we ensure engagement? Well, it's related to assignments, having students to be communicating with each other without me as the faculty being there. How would you keep everybody accountable? Well, you treat this as a learning experience. So you could discuss the learning objective with the students and hear their feedback to whether they are hitting that objective and they feel that your approach is appropriate. So you train what you're doing here as a learning experiment. How would you foster peer learning and class community? That's the fourth point here. Well, how would we foster that? Well, you organize small groups and you leverage breakout rooms. How would you keep the accountability in place? You track that type of meeting time, and you might drop in and you see how students are being engaged. That's why technologies like what Microsoft Teams offers is very important, because you can break your students, as you know, into breakout rooms and then watch what's happening there. Finally, how might you provide methods for follow-up and fair assessment? That's what most of you have talked about, fair assessment. Well, If you provide channels for students' response, like chat boxes, videos, social media, where they could actually send you some input, and you can send them input in return. We asked students to record videos with questions. That is basically saved right now. I could go back to it and assess the depth of knowledge the students is presenting through asking deep and probing questions. So that technology becomes an enabler for me to better assess what is happening online. Because otherwise, if you don't ask every student to ask a question, videotape it and send it to you, A, he is not or she is not engaged. B, you don't know how much do they know, because there's no way of this kind of Q&A and feedback in between. So that was a very powerful mode of really assessing students' engagement and their knowledge as well. And that allows students to also be engaged by saying, you talk to each other and then see how is your peer developing in their knowledge, especially if the course activity requires teamwork and students could actually be assessing each other. So there's a lot of work done in that department, the assessment department, that if you wish to learn more about, I can send you some references. Any questions so far?
We don't see any, Professor. Oh, there's one hand now.
Okay.
Okay, so veo una mano levantada, el profesor Miguel Ángel Mata Chávez, si quiere presentarse, adelante en inglés o en español.
Hello, everyone.
Lo escuchamos muy bajito, profesor, por alguna razón. Ahora no le escuchamos nada.
Was saying hi to Professor Chalah and saying we were discussing some of the pointing. Welcome everyone. This is Miguel.
Fabio, can you hear him?
Really, really low. Professor Miguel, veo que su micrófono está cerca de su camisa. Intente buscarlo más próximo a su boca.
Y ahora está en mute. Ahora, adelante.
Thank you. Well, my question is to Professor Chalah, if you are still recording your sessions now that you have come back to in-person classes. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. So the reason why I said this is a good question, it's actually an excellent question, because yesterday we were talking to faculty in electrical engineering, and they have identified collectively many elements of basic electrical engineering that they want to turn into small 5-minute videos, tape it, and then store it online for all students to see and learn from before they get into engage with any courses in electrical engineering. This is going to become a library of videos. So what we learned from this experience, what we learned from this remote experience, is that if you create this knowledge in the form of videos and store that online, you could really augment your teaching in person with students going into these quick bits of videos that they could refer to, they could learn from, and quite honestly, they could acquire a lot of skills from them. So now that we are in person here on campus, we are still leveraging a lot of that knowledge captured in videos and stored online. We are heading to the point here at Harvard where a tremendous amount of the knowledge is shifted online, even if we are in person. And that is in mechanical, electrical, even bioengineering, mechanical, chemical engineering, applied math, applied physics, computer science. We are doing all of that work right now. We have invested in recording technology, in creating soundproofed rooms, in creating the ability to, as you are working on something actively, you have cameras zooming on what you're doing on your desk and capturing that work. You record it once, you put it online, you visit it next year. If it needs to be refreshed, you refresh it. Otherwise, it's there for the students to constantly look into it, learn from it in an asynchronous mode. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So this is tremendous effort right now that is taking place, and it's not going to go away. This is one of the things that is sticking with us, the post-pandemic.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Así, profesora Nuria Vanessa Figueroa, si se quiere presentar y hacer su pregunta en inglés o en español.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Hello, Professor Chalah. I'm Nuria Figueroa from Institute of Technology of Costa Rica, and I work with the School of Mathematics. This pandemic is made me crazy, but the main problem for me is to convince the students that they actually need to do math work, because they love to see me just solving the things when you see like a movie. And I'm trying them to engage them doing homework, doing math. You need to write it down, not just to see. In your experience, how can I use innovation for living the traditional way of assessment them to a more, I must say, amusement way to learn mathematics? Is there something you can help me?
Is the question related to how you make the topic more attractive?
Yes.
Or is the question related to how you assess the topic, the applied math topic, if it's done remotely?
I would think the first one, because I think that if they are motivated, then I will gain more compromise and do the right things for assessment. But I need them to be engagement and not just see my course as one thing to approve more.
Right. So the challenge you are facing is something we are facing as well. Applied math or math in general is a dry topic. It's not a very easily transformed topic, even with the technology we have. So to begin with, it is a very challenging area to solve. However, anytime you get a chance to connect the fundamentals to the applications, that makes students more engaged. At any given point, when there is an example in the real world where you apply the mathematical equation in solving problems that are physical or even sometimes computational, anytime you can connect the teaching to active learning, that is the solution. Anytime you have the ability to transform a dry equation into how a Tesla car is driving down the road because of that equation, that becomes a solution. Anytime you connect the equation to why the NASA rocket is flying or why the rover is on Mars, because of that fundamental understanding on the mathematical level, anytime you make that connection, that gets the students more excited. If you're talking about pure principles without showcasing applications, then nothing is going to be more than the boring way of teaching and learning math. So we have run into these equations. It requires a lot of innovation to connect the principle to the application. I'm going to give you an example. There is a known knowledge related to the width of the rails, the metal rails that the train sits on and drives on in the US. There's a specific width of that rail, the two metal bars on the ground and the wood in between. That width is standardized. If you dig deeper into where that width between the two bars is coming from, mathematically speaking, it's there. There's an equation. Now, it was proven that there was a transform of a massive NASA rocket that could not be done because the foundation on which that rocket is standing on does not match the distance between the two bars. So far, so good? You could talk about the mathematical equations for that rocket on the foundation under it. That's one example. You could talk about the mathematical equation for why we have these distances between the two bars. That's another example. But then if you dig deeper into the distance between the two bars, the two metal bars, it goes back to the depth, to the distance between the two wheels of the cart that is pulled by horses in the Roman Empire. Let that sink in. So now all of a sudden you could tell the students that the NASA rocket was not be able to be transformed to Florida because of a decision made in the Roman Empire. You see what I did here? Now, there are few holes in the picture here, and I could argue that, but let that sink in. I'm talking about mathematics, but I'm connecting to real world. I'm giving you examples that will excite you to dig deeper into what I'm describing. So anytime, do you see my point? So anytime you have the ability to connect mathematical equations to real world examples, that will engage your students. Maybe you cannot do that 100%, do it 10%, 20%, 30%. That sprinkle into your teaching becomes extremely essential for students to connect to the topic.
Yeah, I see it.
Thank
you very much.
Pleasure.
Y gracias, profesor. Excelente pregunta. And Anna, just to add on the chat, we're seeing also other participants reacting. And one professor suggests that as a professor instructor yourself, you can also ask students for them to look themselves correlations between math and their own life experience. And we have one question on the chat in which Professor Álvaro Camacho Soto asking, how has Harvard been able to catalog recordings using perhaps metadata to identify them and catalog material?
So cataloging is an effort that is going on right now. We don't have the complete catalog yet. It's developing. I call it libraries. Each school has its own library right now. And if you are engaged in certain courses, you have access to these libraries. So those libraries are not shared among schools yet at Harvard. They are within the different schools. School of Engineering has its own library. The business school has a different library. The medical school has a third library, and so on and so forth. So those libraries are localized libraries, and they are accessible to our students within the unit itself or the school itself. Within the school, the cataloging is basically at the team level. My team, for instance, my team is teaching and learning. They have online presence. They have the online capacities to store all this knowledge and to really catalog it, refresh it constantly, bringing new versions of it constantly, and offering it to students. Does that answer the question?
I think so, Professor. Thank you. And we have 3 more questions, if we may.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Profesora Elsa de Piedad de Chinita, adelante si quiere, if you like to open your microphone, Professor, en inglés, en español, en portugués también se puede.
Institute Polytechnic of Beja of Department Engineering. Apart from the videos you make to demonstrate the process, do you use simulators from the unities like computer architecture?
Do you say, do we use simulation?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I will talk about this in a minute. Yes.
Okay.
I'll take one more question, and then I would love to continue because I have a lot of examples. But yes, I will go to the computation in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, profesora. Profesor Jorge Javier Maldonado y profesora Pamela Riquelme, le prometo que a la siguiente que haya oportunidad de preguntas sigue usted, disculpe. Pero profesor Jorge Javier Maldonado, adelante con su pregunta en inglés o en español, por favor.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hanas, it's great to hear you. My name is Jorge Maldonado from Universidad de Cuenca in Ecuador. I have one specific question. A hybrid or online environment requires a certain autonomy of the students, but depending on the level at which they will be more or less prepared to carry out their studies in an autonomous way. In that sense, self-regulation of learning plays an important role. My question is how to support these self-regulation processes from the institution or from the classroom so that they achieve the objectives of the course and achieve the autonomy that the teachers want but sometimes do not encourage them. So can you tell us a little bit about how Harvard approached it? Thank you very much.
Yes. So again, that's another question that I have an example to answer. Give me 1 minute. I'm going to write these two questions. So the one question is about computation. I'll highlight that more in the examples I have. And the second question is about engaging with the students. Would that be the way to ask the question? Engaging with the students in the classroom structure?
Yeah, and how to support them to achieve the learning objectives in the course, independently that they are, for example, in an online mode or face-to-face mode or hybrid mode. Thank you.
Okay, very good. By all means, these are two things I'll answer before the end of my session today. So moving forward with the preparation for the online and hybrid teaching, technology was important. I call it the infrastructure. So we had to prepare for the infrastructure in a way that is truly unique, that's truly supportive of students to be able to reach their learning objective. For instance, we had virtual desktop interfaces and virtual desktop infrastructures, VDI, where students were able to log into the server, pull the knowledge from it, whether they are videos or software, or being able to access some of the research grade tools on the computational side to be able to really support. Going back to the first question we heard about, how have we helped computation? You have to embed computation within the course, not as an add-on, but as a true part of solving the problem. So what does that mean? It means students are commonly doing most of the problem solving online before they come to the labs and physically build the solution. If they don't master the computational part and find the solution computationally that is solid, we don't wave them into coming into the labs to do the physical work, because we will be doing them disservice if we don't make this solid connection between the teaching computationally and the teaching physically. When we went remote, computation took a larger portion of the courses, because now we cannot do much physically in our labs. We had to package boxes and kits and send it to them, but then computation blossomed and almost exploded to the point now it's really a true pillar of our teaching and learning. It's not only a possibility, it's a must for you to complete an engineering course that requires that type of design thinking. Now, we also allow the students to remotely access our computers. So that means that I have a lab, computer lab, that no students are in, but they are connected to. So there is the virtual desktop infrastructure with all the softwares, the videos, and the computational skills. But then we also have the ability for students to get into our computers and do some, because sometimes they don't have the capacities at home to log in with a powerful computer to do the classwork. So we allow them to use our computers remotely. Now, I'm going to actually take a minute and ask you a question. Again, another individual reflection. And in this case, the question is, what's the most important thing that you learned and or developed during this remote teaching experience? So we had 16 months almost. Depends on where you reside, which country you are at. The question to all of you is, and I want you to use the chat box once again, what is the most important thing that you personally learned? Not your department, not your colleague, not your student. You as the educator or the manager or the leader in education. What's the most important thing that you learned and or developed further due to this remote teaching experience? Can we take 5 minutes, please, and then think about this question and then come back?
Thank you, Professor. I'm just going to tell them. El profesor acaba de compartir una reflexión con nosotros. Anas, I think we lost your PowerPoint.
Yeah,
Fabio.
I did. I closed it purposefully.
Oh, okay. I don't know if they'll remember the question.
Oh, I'll put it up. No problem.
Wonderful. El profesor les va a dar 5 minutos para que hagan la reflexión. Y bueno, y vamos a volver a tener esta dinámica de contestar en el chat. Muchas gracias.
So Anna, we can take 5 minutes on top of that if they wish to. Otherwise, I'm ready to keep going.
Is your floor, Anas, whatever you prefer. We're at 11 o'clock mark. We have 1 more hour with you, and believe me, I know at the end they're going to be like, no, okay. We want 2 more hours.
And then I prefer not to take a break. I prefer to keep going because there is a lot of vibrant discussions that will take place next, hopefully.
Absolutely. Then we keep on going.
Perfect. let's give it 2 more minutes, and then we can maybe at 11:10 reconvene.
Wonderful. A las 11:10 se va a terminar el ejercicio. De verdad que excelentes los comentarios que están haciendo y nos va a dar mucho gusto compartirlos con el profesor.
Anna, is there a way we can save the chat box? And that question is to Fabio as well. Is there a way we can maybe save all of that and then later on do some post session assessment of all of that or analysis?
Yeah, it's not a way to export it, but I can get it manually.
Okay. Is there a way you can do that, Fabio, for us? Because I would love to, for us as a group, to maybe translate the feedback and then maybe categorize what we've learned from our colleagues, because this could inform a lot of work later.
Absolutely, and truly it's just we're all in awe of the team. We're talking about it. The challenges that they went through. I'm very inspired by their responses, and I think you will too. I think that's a great idea, Anna.
Yeah, great.
I don't think I will be able to encapsulate in just a few words what they're saying, because it's just very inspiring.
Yeah, so that's why I'm very keen if you can help me in translating that, and then if we can maybe, we don't even have to purify the language, just send it in a raw form. I will do a lot of assessment myself and then share it with you. Plus you can do the same thing, and then we can share that back with our colleagues here so they could actually see what others have said in this session, because that will be complementary to what I'm presenting, so they can see their colleagues in Latin America and Europe and what they had to go through. I think there's a lot of value in that knowledge shared with everyone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, Fabio, that would be great if we can capture what all the comments on the chat, because I think it'll be worth doing an analysis. Very inspiring.
Great.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump in and see what are maybe the top 1 or 2 or 3 themes that were reoccurring in the chat box from the feedback.
Okay, Anna, you're still not able to see the chat, right? So, okay, I'll share with you that one of the most important things is for them to understand that the methodology was important to change it to have it be centered on the student, and that the technology is merely a tool that complements that. Also, many said in one word, innovating is important, that they're also learning how to collaborate amongst themselves with other professors, that they themselves are developing new skills to be flexible, that teaching must be active and engaging. Let me see how else. To really take advantage of the moments of synchronous connection with students.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Anna. So here is the good news. My next part of today's session is to show you how we address the same challenges that you are highlighting, and we learned almost the same thing that you are highlighting as well. Okay, so that's really refreshing, Anna. I'm really happy to see that we are on the same boat. You can see my slide, right?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay, perfect. So from this individual reflection, let me show you some of the considerations, some of the learning moments we had, but I'm going to categorize it in different departments. The first considerations, these are basically take-home messages or outcomes from what we went through. Related to course design, there are 4 points I want to share with you. Number 1, we learned the importance of identifying elements of the classroom practices that we can maintain online, and when we came back to teaching physically, and elements that we can completely transition online. Okay, so now, as I said, now that we are teaching in person, we are still transitioning things online. and we're still using the synchronous, asynchronous learning. We did not ditch that just because we were able to come back to our labs. As a matter of fact, as I said, a tremendous amount of energy is behind truly capturing the infrastructure that we created and keep using it for supporting our in-person teaching. And that goes back to computation as well. I'll show you examples in a minute. The second thing that we identified is strength and limitations of online delivery, which is really linked to the taught subjects. Not every subject could be effectively taught online. Not every subject should be effectively taught in a hybrid way. There's no one size fitting all. We learned that as well. Leveraging emerging research on the co-creation of knowledge through project-based and group-based learning. I will show you a specific example about how we leveraged research work in teaching. We leveraged research resources in teaching. I'll give you an example in a few slides. Finally, considering the course approach to ensuring continuous feedback and authentic assessment in when we do things remotely, or if you do hybrid, that there's an assessment for the online section and an assessment for the in-person section. I'll also show you some examples. So that's for course design. So what does that translate into? The opportunity here was for active learning, as some of you have highlighted. We created kits that were able to be shared with students remotely, and now we're still sharing those kits with students when they are back on campus. Those kits came with recipes, but I'll tell you first some statistics. We shipped 405 kits all over the world in the fall semester, and 363 kits also all over the world for the spring semester. We reached 41 countries, and we reached 26 countries in the spring semester. That's supporting 13 courses and 10 courses as pilot, just to pilot the effectiveness of that work. And here are some of the examples. These are pictures of the kits and the pieces within the kits. Some of it were in electronics, some of it were in mechanical engineering, some of it were for computational purposes, for data sciences, for data analysis, for data capturing, for testing and sensing, for chemical testing, and sometimes just simple design, because we did not want to assume that our students have everything they need, even if it's a scissor, paper, and a glue stick. We did not make any of those assumptions. We provided everything that we usually provide our students in our physical labs, but we did that within packaged kits that we shipped remotely. Okay, so we're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different possibilities that we were engaged in doing and packaging. But remember, we were also during the pandemic, and we had to be in the labs to do this work. So you can imagine the taxation that we had to go through to empower all the above. To be more specific, there are things like this. All of these were sent remotely. Platforms that we were able to find out their importance in shipping as is and giving it to a student, where multiple courses will use the same platform. So imagine that. If you want to do electrical engineering support, if you identify the remote education platform, but then you change what connects to it, then you can kill many birds in one stone. We had to do that type of work. We sent a lot of supplies as well for students to be able to do this type of remote education, or in this case now hybrid education, effectively. Behind all of that, there's tremendous amount of design, pedagogy, safety considerations, and assessment considerations. Let's start with the first thing. Understanding what the pedagogy is related to what are we teaching now. Not everything that we did in the past were packaged and shipped out. We had to reimagine, we had to revisit how we taught certain topics and build it from scratch. That was an opportunity for us, because we had to think about, okay, I cannot do this experiment remotely. What is an alternative experiment for it? Design that, test it, package it, and then ship it. So you understand all of that had to take place within very short period of time. That is reimagining our curriculum. That was the beauty of this opportunity. Once we figured that out, we agreed, of course, with faculty on that. We didn't do it ourselves as teaching staff and myself as the dean. We had to communicate with the faculty, transform the experience into something that could be packaged and shipped for online remote education. Then we thought about the pedagogy behind it. How would I still match what is being done in a classroom meeting online with the package that the student has on their desk? And that's where we had to create videos, tutorials for students to follow, be able to really imagine the true importance of hybrid education. When I'm connecting different things together, especially now, because we still use similar kits. Finally, the assessment. How would you assess the engagement and the knowledge acquired from these kits by the students when I'm remote from them? We had to create different assessment methodologies for active learning online remote education. And I can reflect on that further, but that requires an entire day of describing how we did the assessment remotely. But you see that the size of this operation. Here's another example of different kits. But I am going to highlight this in-house fabricated data collection device. Remember my comment? So we call this Hazel, by the way. This is almost a new brand that we created. This is an in-house made data collection box. We created that in our active learning labs from scratch. This device has the ability to acquire signals, analyze signals, and give you data. When I say acquire signals, there's a receptor. If you change the receptor from a pressure sensor into heat sensor, into carbon dioxide sensor, into pH sensor, into into quality of water sensors, you can change the sensor, but the box itself will analyze the data and give you the answers in terms of the plots and the graphs that you need to analyze, to further analyze. So this was something that was done at the research level, and we worked on it, we developed it further, and we created that solution to be shared with students. And the idea was to keep this device, this box, with the student, for them to use it for multiple courses. So that becomes a more effective way of teaching. So that's from the course design perspective. I'm going to move forward into the student perspective. Considerations and things we learned about. Number one, we need to develop different strategic educational plans that are long-term. Why is that important? Because we have to connect three things together. Number one, the learning objective of the course. Everybody agrees with that, but that's not long-term. Number two, the student demands. The student I'm teaching today are different than the student I taught 10 years ago, and will be different than the students I'll teach 5 years from today. Demands are changing. They come our way for a reason, and we have to understand why and what is the demand they come up with as students. But the most important factor in this equation for strategic planning is the future of work. That's why I shared with all of you the reading material. What drives us as educators to think about pedagogy and strategic educational plans? What drives all of us? Future of work. You have a product that your institute is creating. You have between 2 to 4 years with them as students. That's your product. Once they leave your institute, they go to the real world. There's a future of work waiting for them there. If you did not build this product in a certain way, the product will fail. That's a simple equation, but it's not that simple. If you don't understand where the future of work is, then you cannot plan for it. That's why I shared with you the reading material. I don't have time to go through it today. I hope you at least glimpse through it for you to understand how we are developing strategic plans at Harvard. We are constantly putting our finger on that pulse, constantly analyzing what is happening out there for my product to go out and compete and win. Not only compete, it has to win. Otherwise, I would not be the school I am. So that is important. We learned that because students inform that discussion as well. Students come with demands because they are aware of trends, startups, new technologies, new initiatives, new companies that are emerging. Sometimes they create these companies as well. Students create those companies. We have to address those demands. That's the first thing we consider important as student learning goes. Number two, considering the online conditions. When I build my pedagogy and my courses, sometimes you have to leverage teams. I know this is not the Microsoft Teams, that's a different Teams. You have to leverage teams in your teaching and learning. You have to create team dynamic behind the scene for students to work together, even remotely. That comes with accessibility limitations. That comes with the availability of the technology. That's why I showed you earlier in one slide 3 different possible infrastructure, technology infrastructure solutions that we provided to answer this specific challenge. And the third point here is designing course activities to engage students. I heard engagement before. I heard collaborative work before. I heard skill sets before. That's where you build that into your course planning for students to get engaged further. So I'll give you an example. And that goes back to the simulation question that I got first. And I said I'll be answering that later. We all remember that question, right? How would we get simulation and computation embedded in my planning for new pedagogy? This was a course activity that required a lot of simulation and computation. Why is that the case? Because my students have new expectations today. When I talk about student learning and concentrations for student learning, it goes back to their expectation, not only my expectation as the educator. Student expectations have to be attended to. What are their expectations? That really goes back to the computation and simulation question. The first expectation is the following. Our students grew up in a world where technology is a natural part of their environment. Unlike you and me, they are different. They grew up in a world when that is an expectation. If you don't teach them the same way, then you're going to lose them. If you talk about retention, engagement, and then assessment, if you're not doing the work, then what are you assessing? You are the person that has to actually improve, you as an institute. The second question is, these expectations about technology is really about it being used to help them learn and develop essential skill sets. So I'll give you an example. During the one-year pandemic teaching, one course, it's an environmental engineering course, helped the students to model, to create models to simulate viral spread, the virus spread. So all of that work did not require them being in a lab dealing with any viruses. We cannot do that, of course. We're not the medical school. And even if so, it's a different experience. Here, we help the students to model. That's one of maybe 200 examples I can give you about simulation and computation. But this is very important because we help the students not only to simulate the spread of the virus, but also create quantitative measurement to analyze the physical quantities important to understand the spread of the infection. How many viruses are required to infect a lung? Right? So you can do the math. That's a mathematical equation, going back to how math could be fun and less boring. But then they were able to simulate the viral spread. But then the third point of this course was to assess the efficacy of masks. So now we have the problem. The problem is spreading of a virus. There's a solution related to the mask. Okay. Is the solution appropriate? So they could do this entire work remotely, and they did, and they could come up with complete answers for questions addressed completely by computation and simulation. Zero stepping in any labs, zero. All what they had to do is access our software through the 3 pathways I described earlier for them to understand how does a virus spread? Can I simulate that in a windy environment, in a close-up environment, in a bathroom environment? or in a bedroom environment, or in a train and car environment. You could do this entire simulation. Then how can I assess that spread quantitatively, given the fact we know how many viral load or particles are needed to complete the infection, and then assess the efficacy of the mask. Not only that, they were able to translate that into a project shared with the president of Harvard University, because that informed the way we planned for the return on campus. We used this knowledge to plan Harvard student return on campus, because based on that, we thought about filtration mechanisms, we thought about air circulation, we thought about what type of masks should we use, why this mask is better than that mask. All of that was done computationally by our students to support our community. That is a good example of hybrid education. That's a good example of using computation. That's a good example of using mathematical modeling for you to make sense of math, rather than just keep it dry and just done on a whiteboard. Does that make sense? Okay. So moving forward is going back to the assessment. Assessment goes both ways. Us assessing our students and our students assessing us as well. We thought a lot of how we increase student control, engagement, choice, and independence when we did things remotely. These are some examples of doing things remotely, done outside of our labs, outside of our university, completely outside, in their homes, empowered by the kits I shared with you. So that is truly related to how we inform the discussion about engagement, about the quality of our teaching, and about the assessment of that teaching. And that is basically going back to respecting the student voice in all of that. Okay, so now I am going to shift gears to the technology choice and the discussion about technology choice. Leveraging technology is important. If you look at these pictures here, there are so many different technological advancements shared with our students for them to be able to perform their learning, right? So technology is key in this case, even with the kids I shared. But also we had to understand the strength and the challenges related to offering students these technologies if there's no input, feedback, support that's done remotely for their questions to be answered. Not only that, the true question is, how would you assess the success of this example? How would you assess the success of this example? How would you assess the success of this example? Assessment has to be customized. It has to be customized. Long gone those days where we can use one assessment form that fits all activities. Impossible. We cannot do that. With hybrid education, you have to really customize the assessment based on the activities. But you could also leverage student assessment of each other. These examples, out of hundreds of examples, in many cases, the work was done by a team of students. They could assess their engagement. They could assess their collaborative work. They could assess how much they've learned as a team and individually. So that is something that one could leverage. So when I talk about technology and the choice of technology, that was an active discussion that took months and months to be able to think about what part of material should we send to students. Even if they are here, but I want to do hybrid course support, or if they were online, completely online. Customization versus standardization. So when I talk about customization, do you remember the example of Hazel, that box that I shared with you? That was a standardization of sort, because what I wanted to do there is to create a box that could be standard and could be shared by multiple courses. So the student taking this course or that course could be using the same standardized data collection box, but you change the sensor. You only change the sensor. The student could own this box for 2-3 years and use it constantly as they learn, but you change the elements that you add on top of it for the different needs of each course they get engaged with. So that's the comment about standardization versus customization, which is this one here. Customization means some of these elements are customized for this specific course. Some of it are standardized that they could be used by multiple courses. Being able to recycle the parts is essential. Once you are done with this, you can send it back to us. You can return the kit. Once done, you can keep it if you feel that is something that will help you long term as you learn at Harvard. So going back to this Hazel example, this box, these are some examples of different courses that use the same standardized box that we created at our school. So this was used for a course that's called Introduction to Environmental Sciences and Engineering. The same box was used for a course called Data Analysis and Statistical Interferences in Earth and Environmental Sciences. Same box was used for the fundamental sciences of non-engineers. And the same box as well was used for the state-of-the-art instruments in environmental sciences for different needs. That's standardization. Now, where is computation and computer analysis behind that? This box is controlled by an Arduino chip, okay? So that's a microcontroller. This box spits out data that you have to assess and analyze with software. So there's a computational element, computing element, not computation, computing element to that. But there's also other activities within the course that required the work to be done computationally. Okay. And finally, the last thing I want to share with you is concentrations for faculty and teaching staff. But before I get there, I want to see if there are any questions about the concentrations related to design of the course, concentration related to the technology, or concentrations related to the student engagement.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. The first one, Professor, is how do we make this scalable? And also I will say how, of course, you know, we have Harvard University and all the wonderful resources that our university has, but how can they translate that to a university in Latin America with less resources, right? How does a kit look like for a university with less resources? How can you help us understand that and perhaps bring it down to the Latin American context?
Yes, so that's an excellent question, but that's why LASPAO is important. Because customization based on the environment itself is key. I cannot give you one solution that will fit 140 different countries. No one has that magic bullet. The first starting point is to agree to engage the faculty who are teaching in reimagining what could be done with their courses. As I said, what could be transferred and what could be not transferred online. That's number one. Number two, to really understand what things I am going to teach. What's my learning objective for my course? And then you can design against that. Number three becomes the resources. Resources are not number one. First, you have to get the big picture in place. What could be transferred online? What could be not transferred online? Or what do you desire to put online and what not? Could be as simple as a video. But then you have to understand the learning objectives, of course, and then you can decide what should we package in a kit like this. I totally understand the comment about this is Harvard University. You guys have the ability to do that. How can we translate that into something that applies to the rest? Absolutely true. But that requires the customization. That requires the discussion between people who did it and people who want to do it. So if you have this need in your environment, talk to LASPAO, talk to me. We could talk about how some of these examples could be scalable. For us, fine, one could say, well, you can scale this and build 2,000 copies of the same thing. But even for us, it's challenging. Don't think that we are sitting on mountains of money. That's not the case. We still have to think about what is scalable and what not, what is recyclable and what not, what is meaningful and what not, right? But I think the discussion should become more customized than a general question. But I could give you one tip. Leverage the current ecosystem around your students. Why is that important? I'll give you a very quick example here. 3 years ago, I was teaching a water engineering course to non-Harvard students. And I invited a group of Kenyan students from Kenya. And they came over, they had true water engineering challenges back home because their water that they drink and they cook with is unclean. So they had a reason for learning about water engineering. That's different than the reason of my students in Cambridge who want to learn about water engineering. Very good. Of course, students in Cambridge, not Harvard, it's the non-Harvard students in Cambridge that I'm teaching, versus students from Kenya have different perspective of the problem. Goes back to the question, the Kenyan student cannot afford what the Cambridge student can afford. Of course, that's true. You know what we did? We brought the teaching to the principles of water purification. What takes dirt away from water? Could be a piece of cotton, charcoal, gravel, sand. We started with the bare minimum technology required for water purification, and then we build things up. And as you build things up, you could choose to say, I could stop here because that's the level of my support and my resources. Or you can say, well, I could actually go higher because that's where I could actually leverage my resources. And you can design that. There is a customization element in the answer. But then the rest of the story is as follows. I traveled to Kenya after the course was done to follow up on my students who were with me, the Kenyan students. 5 of them went back home and implemented the same technology we taught them to clean up the entire water system in their village. With what? With leaves, charcoal, gravel, and sand. No filters, no real filters, 0 filters. Why? Because we were able to teach the principles. So no one has the right to say, well, I don't have the money, I cannot do anything. Nonsense. You can always do something, but you have to think about the customization of that approach. And every country, every group, every university, every community has their own challenges and their own resources. You have to think, when we talk innovation, that's where your innovation has to shine. So don't think this is a reason for you to hang your problem on others or on the resources. You start with your way of thinking about innovation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Anas, and we're seeing a lot of great responses on the chat, great reactions in saying that this is actually a perfect way to a perfect excuse to continue connecting between professors in the Americas and working together, that this is a perfect context for that, as you said, there are no excuses to not innovate, right? We can all innovate at our level.
Yeah. So to go back to the answer itself, LASPAO, I said, is a very good avenue to create this kind of connectivity. I traveled with LASPAO to many countries in Latin America for this purpose. You have to visit the environment. You have to be part of the environment to understand the current challenges where you are, not where I am. And then we can have the discussion on the ground for how might one think about the promotion of new innovative technologies. Okay, I have to move forward. So then, this is one of my dear parts of the discussion, the considerations for faculty and teaching staff, the humans. Students are humans, of course, but this is us. How might we think about us becoming better teachers? The first thing is defining the teaching staff role. Are you a teacher in the hybrid model? Are you a guiding principal? Are you a facilitator, or are you a learning participant? You have to define that. In a hybrid model, you could be just a facilitator. You don't have to talk much. You just facilitate the discussion. In a hybrid model, you could be the guide. You just guide the discussion and then facilitate it. You could be the teacher. You walk in and you pose as a teacher and you present what needs to be heard. And you could be anywhere in that spectrum. This is precisely why the hybrid model is important. Defining the teaching role. Where are you exactly? Or who is in your teaching staff doing what? Okay. Then thinking about best practices. Best practices to provide to provide the feedback and to provide the input that the students are waiting for. And then finally, leveraging the asynchronous learning. As I said before, hundreds of videos are being created now within the School of Engineering, and they will be put online for our students to access. That is leveraging asynchronous learning, because students could reach that knowledge anytime they want. They don't have to wait for me to say, I am in the classroom between 9 and 10, come and listen to me. They could be listening to that knowledge when I'm asleep, or vice versa. Okay, now that's not the extent of this discussion. When the pandemic hit, we realized that we have to teach certain software. That goes back to computation and simulation. This is the true answer to the question I had before. And that also is connected to how we can get the ongoing learning objective in place, because now we're talking about specific hybrid resources needed on the software side. So we identified many software packages and tools that we needed to be aware of. But we realized that our teaching staff don't have that knowledge completely for all these packages. So we started with self-assessment. What does that mean? This is the assessment of Python skill for 15 individuals on my staff that are responsible for teaching software. We took every individual and we asked 5 important questions to assess the breadth of the knowledge, and each person identified where their knowledge is per this skill set. So this person considered themselves to be intermediate or basically introductory level. The darker color is expert level. So this individual 9, 10, 11, and 12 said we are expert in answering all these questions, when question number A is the least complex, question E is the most complex in teaching that skill set. This is self-assessment for the skill level in each piece of software. We did that first to understand who are the experts on our team, because when we did things in person, you could always go somewhere else. But when you're doing things remotely, you have to have better readiness and preparation to support hybrid education. This is something we excelled at. We were able to assess for individual 4 and 5, they had 0 knowledge in this pathway, in this Python skill set, 0. Some of which they said I could answer elementary questions, but more complex questions I cannot really address. We started here, and we did the same thing for all software we have. Everything we have, we assess that way. You see what that translates into? It translates into an assessment of our proficiency. We realize where are the areas that we have to address immediately. That goes back to the pivoting, what I started with. We had to pivot quickly, and we addressed the needs at the red level or pink level because that's urgent. And then we wanted to bring all the proficiency to the point where we can actually feel comfortable that we are ready to support our students. So our focus was in this area. We had to focus on bringing the knowledge skill set on our side, in our staff, to the level we're comfortable to say everybody could fit in, not just few experts on the computational and simulation side. Because now there's an enlarged need and demand on computation and simulation. So that was a brilliant learning opportunity for us, the educators, for the faculty, for the teaching staff, for me personally, to say, I'm not efficient here. I have to bring that level of efficiency up. Without the pandemic, this discussion wouldn't have taken place. Without the pandemic, this red bar would not be unearthed and discovered. We discovered it because we had to do something about it. And needless to say, we addressed that. But you understand that when you talk about challenges on the teaching staff side, this is how you address readiness. You do that with a specific methodology. Of course, you have to leverage self-assessment, and then you can identify where the deficiency is, and you address that. Okay, so what have we learned? What have we learned today? Well, this summarizes it. This crisis has revealed the importance of good teaching and how difficult it is. This comes from the Chronic of Higher Ed, and I have that here. Actually, it's this one. This is the Chronic of Higher Ed. It's a fantastic resource for educators, okay? And this was an April 17th, 2020 study where it started by saying this crisis, the pandemic, has revealed the importance of good teaching and how difficult it is, okay? So that's all I wanted to share with you today. I will stop sharing my slide because I want to hear and see your
comments. You can leave it up because that way the translation will continue as they have questions, if we may.
Sure.
And thank you so much. Everybody already started clapping and thanking you. We have around I don't know, 12 minutes left or so. We want to make sure to respect your time, and we want to make sure that we have at least a couple of questions. We might not be able to address them all, but I'm going to ask participants to raise their hand. Si gustan, si alguien tiene preguntas, yo imagino que no vamos a tener tiempo para todas, así que les pido que a los que quieran participar levanten su mano y mantengamos la pregunta súper concisa para que tengamos la oportunidad de darle la palabra a los más participantes posible. De nuevo, inglés-español, por favor, preséntense de qué institución y país vienen para que el profesor también los conozca un poco más. Vamos a estar capturando todos los comentarios del chat también para un análisis más a fondo. De verdad que ha sido muy enriquecedor esta conversación. A ver, no sé, no veo ninguna pregunta. Si alguien gusta levantar la mano o si estamos ya listos para darle también las gracias y la despedida del profesor. ¿Ninguna otra pregunta? Bueno, muy bien. Parece que no. Parece que estamos bien y que nos dejó con mucho de qué pensar. Si gustan abrir sus micrófonos, Anas, we want to thank you. It seems like everybody stayed with a lot of food for thought. So I think we're good. And Professor Catherine, adelante si quiere abrir su micrófono. Bueno, veo que bajó la mano.
Hola, sí, estoy acá.
Adelante, profesora, por favor, si se quiere presentar. Y Anas, if you'll be so kind as to put back your slide, that way they'll see your translation and the response. We have one question, it looks like.
Sí.
Y todos, por favor, si pueden cerrar sus micrófonos nuevamente. Adelante, profesora Catherine.
Muchas gracias. My name is Catherine Orellana. I'm from Chile. I work in the University Autónoma. Y voy a hacer mi pregunta en español. ¿Cuál es la diferencia entre los equipos que trabajan para estas innovaciones y los docentes que resisten un poco este tipo de elementos? ¿Y cómo configuran eso como unidad o como departamento? Justamente yo trabajo en esa área y creo que hay una brecha entre los docentes que están en la vanguardia de innovación y los docentes que siempre resisten el cambio y se encuentran en un paradigma más tradicional de la enseñanza. Entonces, ¿cómo lo viven? Me gustaría saber.
Muchas gracias, profesora. Claro que sí, voy a traducir su pregunta. Anna, so the question is about innovation and resistance to change that she, and I'm sure this is pervasive in all universities, there are professors who want to change, they want to innovate, and there's those who are more traditional and they resist any transformation. So how do you bring them together and have them work together as a team with those differences?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent question. And I must say that we face the same thing here for different reasons. Our faculty know their importance the way every faculty does. But they have the extra bonus here of saying, I am a faculty at Harvard University. Don't tell me how to teach. And they have the right to say that, absolutely. And quite honestly, we learn from them. I mean, myself, my staff, we all go to our faculty to learn from them and to consult with them. With that said, there is room for common sense here. And the common sense is the demand is coming from the urgent pivot need. And the demand is coming from students. No one is going to argue with demand coming from students. And student voices, the way we have trained them, is respected. And if I have a student saying, I complete my study here and then I finish, I go out to the real world and I'm not ready, you didn't train me right. You know, that could sink any institute and could really bring it down to its knees, because at the end of the day, that's the product that you care about. So what does that mean? It means you have to leverage those signals. As a professor, as a head of a department, as the dean of the school, the president of the school, you have to capture the data first coming from the micro environment, which is in your school, and the mega environment outside of your school, where all of that is presenting you with facts. You bring facts to faculty, and I will be surprised if faculty will resist that. Now, the resistance might be more on the micromanagement side, which is within the classroom, I still want to teach in a certain way. Well, unfortunately, I don't have a solution for that. I ran into similar problems, and the only way we were able to bypass some of that is by chipping in, by making the life of the professor easier, by doing some of the work ourselves. Whether it's creating the video, creating the kit, creating the active learning example. Everything I showed you earlier today was done by the teaching staff, not by the faculty. Those packages, being here during COVID in the labs, building that capacity, doing the online capacities, doing the computational software accessibility, all of that was done for the faculty, not by the faculty. What does that mean? It means we are making their life easier to pivot. We are making their life easier to adopt. So that's the only thing I could share with you as a possible solution or advice.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you so much. And we see this common is very prevalent in our programs, Ana. So Latin America and Harvard University definitely share many similar challenges. So thank you. We have 2 more questions, if we may. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask them to be very succinct and to the point. Profesora Pamela Riquelme, por favor, si puede abrir su micrófono y presentarse, y les agradecemos que sean súper concretos para aprovechar el tiempo del profesor y también el de ustedes.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Riquelme from Universidad Central de Chile, and my question is related with the question that Catherine made. About the policies of the university. How do they decide institutionally which courses are switched to hybrid mode? Is it a decision of each teacher, or do you give certain requirements to the professors? That kind of things that you made as policies. That's my question. Thank you.
Excellent question. We don't have policies to begin with. We do not. But we have decisions made by faculty within their areas. So we have the electrical engineering area, the mechanical engineering area, the computer science area, the applied math area, and different areas, many other areas. Each area has the body of the faculty and the director of the area, which is a senior faculty. They make the decision based on their curriculum internally, and then they share it with other units to ensure consistency. Because if I am teaching applied math courses, introductory applied math courses are needed for electrical engineering. They're needed for chemical engineering. So there is connectivity, many connectivities. There are many connectivities between different units as they make collective decisions to ensure that the curriculum is solid. But there's no centralization of that. Unlike other schools, there's no head of the school who is going to say, all of you do this. No, the decision is shared between units, but the decisions are made within the units. That's the way so there's no one policy that will apply to all of them.
Thank you.
Gracias, profesora. We have one last question, Ana. Profesora Norma Silvana Valereso, adelante, por favor, con su pregunta.
Hola, buenos días. Voy a hablar en español. Mi nombre es Silvana Valareso desde la Universidad Peruana de Ciencias Aplicadas. Mi pregunta va relacionado a las evaluaciones. En el contexto de la pandemia, en esta migración al tema online, a muchos docentes les ha costado la parte de la evaluación, de los exámenes, y aún hasta ahora viven esta preocupación por la copia, por el plagio, y al llevarlo a un mundo online no ha sido posible cambiar totalmente este repensar de las evaluaciones. Quería saber qué comentarios y experiencias nos podría compartir al respecto.
Muchas gracias, profesora. Professor Valereso is from Peru, and she's asking about evaluation and the challenges that we all professors, participants here, and I'm sure at Harvard as well, have with evaluation and integrity, cheating, and how has Harvard addressed that, and you yourself when it comes to evaluation?
For hybrid online teaching, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so that's another very tricky subject. Cheating could be a human function. So it doesn't mean that if I have Harvard students or non-Harvard students, they will be different. I mean, cheating is cheating. If you have the tendency to do so, you will do so. So how did we assess that? In many cases, the work that we asked our students to do online is not to answer questions, is not to simply write an essay that you can cut and paste and complete it, is not simply related to yes-no solutions. In many cases, it's related to the creation of something, right? That requires customization. And especially when we talk about building devices or using devices to collect data and share data. If you don't do it, there's no data. If there's no data, there's no analysis. If there's no analysis, there's no grade. Okay, so we had to pivot also to the way we assess things. And as I said, talking about assessment, I'm more than happy to come and I'll give a talk for like 10 hours about assessment and what we did with it, because it had to be different. Which means the activity has to be different. You cannot do the same activity you do physically online with different assessment. It has to be the same. But this assessment done physically, when I'm in the classroom seeing what's happening, is different than the assessment when things are happening when I'm away. Therefore, we had to change the activities. So you don't keep the activities the same and then talk about different assessment. You have to change the activity. You have to change the way you inform your decision to whether the student learned or did not learn. So that's why it's not simply transforming things from the classroom to online and then that's it. That's the end of the story. You have to revisit how you teach and how those activities are designed to begin with. That's why it's not an easy solution. It was not a simple pivot. That's why I shared this understanding of initial pivot and then long-term pivot when you design things from scratch in some cases. Because then if you design it from scratch, you will account for the fact this would not be done if someone is cheating. You have to do the work for you to collect data, for you to share the data with me, for you to do the assessment and the analysis. So it's all connected.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anas. And just so you know, we are going to have Professor Dan Levy from Harvard Kennedy School actually discussing evaluation. That's our last module of hybrid and active teaching and learning. By the way, you're always welcome, Anas, to come to our module. As you said, you're part of the LASPAO family, and we're so grateful for all of your insights. And again, thank you so much, Anas. We'll let you go. We're going to stay a little bit longer with some announcement, but again, we want to thank you so much for absolutely everything.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anas.
Okay, so
thank you.
Just one thing to say that if anyone has a question, they should reach out to you and the LASPAO family, and I'm more than happy to address that once I hear the comments. And I want to thank Fabio. Fabio is fabulous. So thanks for helping me today.
Well,
absolutely.
it was my pleasure.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anas. See you very soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bueno, pues hemos tenido una sesión por demás enriquecedora. Nos dio muchísimo gusto verlos tan entusiasmados, participando. No queremos quitarles más tiempo. Nos vamos a quedar 15 minutos extras nada más para, ahora sí que, bueno, primero como que todavía pensar y bueno, como que tomar, ¿no?, toda esta información, y nos vamos a tardar un poco en procesarla. Varios anuncios nada más, y sé si se me pasa algo, también Fabio. Lo primero que les quiero decir es que van a estar recibiendo un correo de parte de Ceci sobre siguientes pasos de aquí al siguiente módulo. El lunes vamos a tener la segunda sesión sobre el certificado de inteligencia artificial, que es parte del valor agregado enorme de este programa. La certificación de inteligencia artificial es un experto de parte de Microsoft nos va a dar este segundo módulo. El primer módulo está disponible en la grabación. Todas las grabaciones de módulo 1 y módulo 2 van a estar disponibles en general. Ahí hay en Files, ahí están todas las grabaciones. Hay una carpeta con grabaciones. Entonces, todas están disponibles ya. Dime, Ceci.
Sí, solo especificar que las del módulo 1 están dentro del canal módulo 1 y las del módulo 2 están dentro del canal módulo 2.
¿También? ¿No están en general todas?
No las ven.
Ok, está bien, por favor, Ceci es la que sabe. Entonces, ella, si nos dice que en módulo 1 pueden encontrar las de módulo 1, en módulo 2 las de módulo 2. No, Ceci, no sé si pudieras en tu pantalla compartir dónde encontrarlas, porque hemos tenido varias preguntas al respecto. También, mientras tanto, les quiero decir que muchos de ustedes han tenido problemas viendo en el calendario las sesiones en vivo. No sabemos qué está sucediendo. También Fabio está intentando investigar dentro de Microsoft cómo solucionar esto. Sin embargo, ustedes, cuando entren a la hora la cual tenemos nuestras sesiones, ustedes van a poder unirse directamente. Si van al chat general, van a ver que está prendida una cámara ya con la sesión en vivo, le dan clic y ahí se van a unir. Ceci nos está enseñando dónde están las grabaciones de módulo 1 y módulo 2 para que ya si algunos de ustedes no han podido estar con nosotros en vivo, puedan ver las grabaciones y se pongan al corriente. Me preguntan también sobre inteligencia artificial. ¿Cuál es esta certificación? Es una certificación que al ustedes completar estos módulos, que van a ser 3 sesiones sincrónicas y un examen final que va a dar Microsoft, ustedes van a recibir una certificación de parte de ellos en inteligencia artificial. Entonces, Ceci, ¿dónde encuentran las grabaciones?
Bueno, lo primero, claro, en general están las grabaciones aquí donde dice Files. Me imagino que ellos los ven como archivos. Aquí están las grabaciones de todas las reuniones que hemos hecho, pero para tener mejor claridad, las he puesto en módulo 1, las que corresponden al módulo 1, por ejemplo, se van aquí a archivos, a files, y aquí están los videos pregrabados del profesor Pablo Valdivia y los videos de los talleres. Entonces aquí están los talleres, taller 1, que tuvo 2 partes, taller 2, que tuvo 2 partes. Y aquí también dispusimos las PPT que el profesor ese día mostró en los talleres. Y luego el módulo 2, si se van aquí a Files, Archivos, van a ver los videos pregrabados de la profesora Michelle. Y luego van a ver los videos del taller de ayer de la profesora Michelle. Y hoy día ya estaríamos poniendo el taller 2 del profesor Ana. Esa es la forma.
Súper, muchas gracias, Ceci. Y no se tienen que inscribir para el curso de inteligencia artificial, simplemente Ceci les acaba de mostrar dónde están guardados. También lo de inteligencia artificial, Ceci, ¿dónde lo pueden encontrar?
Sí, lo de inteligencia artificial está aquí, por ejemplo, se van a módulo 1 o módulo 2, viceversa, y aquí arriba, donde está todo el material de preparación para los módulos, van a encontrar donde dice inteligencia artificial. Pinchan ahí. Y aquí están los talleres de inteligencia artificial, el lunes 22, por ejemplo, que corresponde a ese. Y el material de preparación, aquí también están los materiales de preparación, son videos pregrabados, y aquí también hemos dispuesto los talleres. Bueno, el único taller que ha habido, que fue el noviembre 1, y está la grabación del taller 1. Y aquí después vamos a poner la grabación del taller 2.
Excelente, muchas gracias, Ceci. No se tienen que inscribir, ustedes al ser parte ya de DIP del programa, pueden acceder, ser parte de los workshops y por lo tanto ustedes también pueden tomar el examen final. Les pedimos que por favor aprovechen que es una contribución muy importante que está haciendo Microsoft a este programa. Y bueno, de ahí en más van a recibir un correo de Ceci sobre qué es lo que hay que hacer entre módulo 2, módulo 3. Módulo 3 va a ser el 14 y el 17 de diciembre en vivo. Una semana antes, como siempre, se les dará acceso a los materiales para preparación para ese módulo. Va a ser con el profesor Dan Levy de Harvard Kennedy School y él justamente va a estar hablando sobre evaluación del aprendizaje y la enseñanza activa e híbrida. Una última cosa, antes también de preguntarles si tienen alguna duda técnica, les quería comentar en base a lo que decía el profesor Anas y la experiencia de las PAU, y también Ceci si quiere agregar algo, que ella también ha estado en muchos programas de nosotros y tiene muchísima experiencia también en educación, es sobre la resistencia y la innovación. Preguntaba, no recuerdo, disculpe, la profesora me parece que de Perú, sobre cómo le hacemos para integrar esos equipos, no, de Chile, de la Universidad Central de Chile, Catherine. ¿Cómo le hacemos para integrar esos profesores que se resisten al cambio y a los que quieren innovar? De parte de las PAO, a todos ustedes, por ejemplo, lo que se les recomendó a sus tomadores de decisiones fue que invitaran a personas que ya fueran innovadores, que fueran agentes de cambio, que estuvieran sedientos de transformar su práctica docente, porque es lo que vemos. Es muy difícil, hay una curva un bell curve, donde siempre vemos que los innovadores están aquí y bueno, es muy difícil arrastrar a gente que no quiere cambiar. Nuestra recomendación son dos cosas: unirse, como decía el profesor Anas, con aquellos que sí quieren cambiar, y datos. Una vez que ustedes tienen datos sobre la retención y el aprovechamiento de mejora de estudiantes que están participando en programas que son activos en la enseñanza y el aprendizaje, los datos no mienten. Entonces, ahí es como eso arrastra a los otros a querer cambiar, porque como decía el profesor Anas, al final lo que un profesor quiere es que su estudiante tenga éxito en su sala de clase y en la vida real. Y es lo que toda institución quiere, es la invitación que les hacemos nosotros y lo que hemos visto en nuestros programas de las PAO para justamente agregar a lo que decía el profesor Anas. Ceci, no sé si se me pase algo, Ceci, y también dar espacio a que hagan preguntas a Fabio.
Una última cosita de parte mía es que puse un aviso en el canal de PCP hoy día anunciando que necesitamos urgentemente que seleccionen a los líderes, porque ya vamos a abrir el espacio para que suban el borrador del prototipo y así tenemos tiempo de revisar ese borrador para que después sigan adelante trabajando en su proyecto. Así que por favor es urgente, lean el mensaje en el canal PCP y por favor seleccionen en amarillo al líder o la líder que va a representar el grupo, porque va a ser a esa persona a quien le vamos a enviar el acceso para que someta el borrador. Ese es como lo más importante. Bueno, y esto también lo voy a repetir de nuevo en el correo de seguimiento que les vamos a enviar hoy más tarde.
Gracias, Ceci. Y sobre la tarea de este módulo, Ceci, ¿quieres comentar algo? Porque seguramente habrá preguntas.
Sí, la tarea de este módulo hay algunas preguntas en el chat general que mencionan que son las mismas preguntas del módulo 1 y efectivamente es la misma pregunta y la misma estructura. Lo que sí cambia es el contenido. En el módulo 1 preguntábamos sobre un cambio posible sobre las estrategias de aprendizaje, cómo trabajar el aprendizaje activo en un ambiente híbrido. Se preguntaba por indicadores y se preguntaba por desafíos que se pueden enfrentar para hacer estos cambios. Son 3 preguntas. Luego el módulo 2 tiene la misma estructura de cómo van a utilizar la transformación curricular, que es lo que se corresponde al módulo 2, en un cambio institucional. ¿Cuáles son los indicadores que ustedes pueden identificar para medir ese cambio? ¿Y cuáles son los desafíos que ustedes se van a enfrentar para implementar ese cambio curricular? Entonces, y el módulo 3 va a tener la misma estructura. Lo que sí cambia es el contenido. Por ejemplo, el módulo 3 va a incluir cómo ustedes van a hacer un cambio en las evaluaciones de los aprendizajes. Lo mismo, cuáles son los indicadores que tienen para medirlo y luego cuáles son los desafíos que pueden enfrentar a la institución para implementar este cambio. Misma estructura, diferente contenido.
Ceci, muchas gracias. Y les pedimos por favor que estén al pendiente del correo de Ceci sobre qué pasa entre módulo 1 y módulo 2. Y ahorita nada más también para reiterarles que ya deben de estar trabajando en sus proyectos finales. Les quería preguntar, ¿sería útil si Ceci y yo tenemos un office hour sobre los proyectos finales o hay claridad? Si sí quieren un office hour, tal vez antes, no sé, antes de salir de break, Ceci, que nos den un thumbs up y le podemos hacer una media hora de preguntas y respuestas sobre el proyecto final entre módulo 2 y módulo 3. ¿Qué te parece, Ceci? Por favor, si lo necesitan, nos pueden dar un thumbs up aquí en las reacciones de arriba. Si no, nos va a dar mucho gusto saber que están claros sobre el proyecto final, que ya están trabajando a full. ¿No? Parece que no, que están claros.
Bueno, sí, hay una profesora que dice, sí, por favor. Yo creo que podemos dar unos 30 minutitos el viernes, por ejemplo, como lo hice la vez pasada, y que se unan los que quieran, y si no, dejamos la grabación también disponible.
Excelente, excelente. ¿Qué porcentaje del proyecto sería utilizando la tecnología de inteligencia artificial? No, es realmente, profesor Antonio, eso es decisión de su equipo. O sea, el proyecto final es sobre definir un proyecto en común como solución a un problema común, innovando en su práctica, activando su práctica en la enseñanza y el aprendizaje activo. Si ustedes quieren utilizar inteligencia artificial, excelente. Si no quieren, excelente. Es dependiendo de lo que sea pertinente al problema que ustedes van a resolver. Entonces, Ceci, muchas gracias por tu tiempo para ese office hours. Yo creo que entonces si te queda bien, el viernes que entra nosotros tenemos Thanksgiving aquí en Estados Unidos, pero no sé, tal vez el siguiente viernes pudiéramos hacer, nosotros les avisamos por email y les pedimos que como siempre sigan activos en Teams, en nuestra plataforma, que también ahí estamos en comunicación constante. Ceci, ¿algo más?
Por mi parte no, lo mismo, que se comuniquen a través de la plataforma. Todos los días estamos revisando y respondiendo a la brevedad.
Una questão, por favor. Quando um grupo tem só 2 elementos, quando deve ter 12, qual é a vossa decisão? Como é que vão colocar esses 2 elementos aleatoriamente no outro grupo? 2 ou 3 ou 4, depende.
Okay, déjame hacer la traducción. Cuando un grupo tiene solamente dos personas, básicamente es la situación de Elsa. Su grupo solo tiene 2 personas y necesita que se cambie a un grupo con menos 12. ¿Cómo van a proseguir con eso?
Ceci, ¿qué te parece?
Un grupo con 2, déjame, estoy justo en el Excel mirando.
¿Que te conteste la profesora?
Perdona, 2 es lo máximo de personas. Los grupos tienen que tener un número límite, ¿cierto?
Oh, sí, 12.
12. Los otros somos solamente 2. Por tanto, tenemos que cambiar de grupo, ¿no? O de tema.
¿Qué grupo? ¿Qué número es usted?
17, creo.
17. El 17 tiene 6.
6.
Debería tener, pero tal vez no tengo participado de los eventos.
¿Cuál es el nombre de la profesora? La pierdo.
Elsa da Piedade, Chinita, Suárez, Rodríguez.
¿Está anotada en el Excel? Yo no la veo, Elsa.
Estoy en Excel.
Si le parece bien, profesora, ¿por qué no contactas directamente junto con la otra persona que usted sabe está en su equipo? Y así coordinamos.
Ha contactado, mas no ha respondido.
Oh,
Okay.
¿dónde? Eso es muy raro porque yo respondo. Dígame, ¿dónde me escribió?
No. Hay que enviado mal.
¿Qué dijo?
Sí, no entendí, Fabio. Fabio, ahora sí te necesitamos.
Sí, sí
I send a mail to Cecilia.
¿Email? Ok, hoy ya no he revisado email, así es que ya voy a revisar los emails más tarde, terminando esta reunión.
Ella me va a ayudar, profesora, y así definimos si la ponemos en otro grupo, ¿ok? Y con mucho gusto tendremos el Office Hours, profesor Luis Carlos Monge, para que se resuelvan las preguntas sobre el proyecto final. ¿Alguna duda sobre tecnología? Porque aquí tenemos a Fabio. Como les digo, estamos recibiendo muchas dudas sobre que no ven los workshops en el calendario. Y entonces eso no sabemos todavía cómo resolverlo. Fabio está intentando pues ver cuál es la solución. Sin embargo, no sé, Fabio, si quieras mostrar dónde pueden encontrar las sesiones en vivo y cómo se pueden unir ya dentro de la plataforma.
Dale,
Lunes,
perfecto.
¿a qué horas es?
A las
Lunes,
10 de la mañana.
10 de la mañana,
Hora de,
hora de
Boston. Y todo
hora
eso
de
también
Boston.
está en nuestra plataforma, en el módulo 0, ¿verdad, Ceci? Está el calendario completo de todas las...
Gracias por recordármelo, porque muchos me han pedido información de que necesitan ver esto más estructurado, que se pierden en las fechas, y les vuelvo a reiterar, el módulo 0 es precisamente para eso, donde está la preparación del programa, y ahí están las fechas y cómo funciona esto de los módulos, de cómo prepararse antes a los talleres, luego los talleres y después talleres. Entonces es importante que revisen el módulo 0 para que tengan esta lógica de la línea de tiempo.
Bueno, estoy compartiendo mi pantalla y voy a mostrar si por algún acaso sus calendarios no estiverem mostrando los eventos como deberían. Si tú miras el evento de ayer, el evento de hoy, y el evento de lunes están todos acá. Pero se por algum motivo não se aparecerem, sempre que um evento ao vivo estiver ocorrendo com uma reunião, miras que ao lado de general aparece uma pequena câmera. Isso significa que existe uma reunião passando neste momento dentro deste equipo. Basta que tu vás a general e aqui terá a opção de fazer um simples join nessa reunião. Quando fizer isso, vai ser levado diretamente à reunião que estás agora. E esta é a maneira que consigo mirar, por exemplo, se em la atividade que hicimos ayer, que teníamos muitas pessoas que continuavam em suas reuniões e não estavam retornando. Como, por exemplo, equipo 1 agora tem uma pessoa que está conectada diretamente lá. O mesmo está se passando dentro da equipe de PCC. Também existe uma pessoa conectada em uma reunião. Pero basta que tu mire por esta camarita e haga clique em Join, que se juntará a la reunião que estás passando.
Gracias, Fabio. Eso es en canal general siempre. ¿Hay alguna
Eso,
otra
en
pregunta?
canal general.
Sí, en canal general. Nuestros workshops en vivo van a estar siempre en canal general. Hay que meterse a la hora indicada y lo van a ver ahí. ¿Cómo saber la hora indicada? Como dijo Ceci, siempre en módulo 0 es la guía. Hay que leer módulo 0 sobre la metodología del curso, que ya estamos a la mitad, y también todo el calendario de actividades está ahí. Así que siempre ahí ustedes pueden referirse para saber cuándo es el siguiente módulo, cuándo van a tener acceso a los materiales, cuáles son las sesiones en vivo, cuándo son las sesiones también de inteligencia artificial. Veo que el profesor Camilo Peña tiene una pregunta. Profesor, me parece que ustedes justamente estuvimos en contacto el día de hoy porque no veían en el calendario las sesiones en vivo, ¿correcto? ¿O tiene otra duda?
Sí, no, una duda para Fabio.
Dime.
Hoy, Fabio, ¿cómo puedo